and tonight's virtual live stream event. Thank you all so much for joining us. I am Carly Iacono, and tonight I am joined by the founding principal, Carlo Enzo of Urban Office Architecture. Carlo is a world-renowned architect and a well-known educator. Welcome, Carlo.
Thank you so much, Carly. It's really a pleasure being here. Very interesting, and I know we're going to be talking about some very interesting things.
Absolutely. So glad you could join us. So before we get started with tonight's content, I would like to thank Selman, of course, for organizing these great events and our list of sponsors that make all of this possible. And those are CNA Seneca Construction, Skyline Scaffolding, DNA Construction Advisors, Champion Elevator, Remax 100, City Bay Capital, Property Shark, Hydrotech Environmental, NYREM, Real Estate Promos, Clean to Clean, and Eco Safety Consultants. So thank you for everyone who's involved with RED and NYC. So let's jump in. We have a lot to cover, and a half an hour is never enough time. Nope. So why don't we start, Carlo, by hearing about you and your company and just your philosophy on architecture, which is pretty unique.
Absolutely. And Carly, again, thank you so much. And Salman, same. Thank you so much. Well, I don't have specific answers. I think that's important to know, Carly. I think it's everything's a work in progress. It's an innovation, it's a transformation, it's an adaptation, as we kind of see obviously with what's going on in the world. And the office and myself is kind of the same thing. So I will give you some parameters and sort of guidelines and some ideas of what I do and what we have been doing. But the truth is that I never see this as something established that fits into a box, but more of as, like I said, an evolving kind of timeline. And so it is, I was born in Italy some time back. And since a very young age, I fell in love. Well, I was always drawing. People ask me, I've been doing this kind of a parallel, and I'll be opening a lot of parallel things. So stop me if I go off course. But I do a lot of social media work, and I get to interact with a lot of people around the world. And a lot of people always ask me, when did you start drawing? And the answer is, I don't remember, meaning I always drawn. It was never a time where I remember, okay, now I'm going to start drawing, right? As far as I can remember, 1, 2, or 3 years old, I was doing that. So I was kind of born with that. And then that was my thing. And I felt it, and people were telling me, oh, that looks amazing, this and that. Even my mother would say drawings, this is like typical story. By the age of 10, in middle school, we started doing these orthographic projections. We do line drawings of simple geometrical things. I loved it. I still remember today, which is a few years back, obviously. I loved it so much that I started to discover a little bit more about that kind of drawings. And by the age of 14, I taught myself how to draw perspective. And perspective was really based on these art history books, and there were some drawings that explained what perspective was, and some churches and kind of traditional buildings. And so I started doing these drawings, and I said, you know what, wow, if I can do this for a living, that's it. That's what I want to do. And so at age 14, somebody told me, well, that's what architects do. I said, well, really? Well, then that's what I want to do. And over the next, from 14 to 18, there was this struggle of figuring out, am I doing an architecture, something else? My father was a lawyer. There was all this pressure of doing different things. And I said, you know what? I think I am doing architecture. So I came to New York, of all places. I was 18 years old. And it was a long story, which we don't have time for it now. But I came to New York, I was 18. I got off the bus coming from Washington, D.C., got off the bus at Port Authority. And I saw Times Square and the skyscrapers. And I said, that's it. I want to be an architect. I want to be an architect in New York. And that particular moment, my life kind of completely transformed. So I flew back to Italy about a week later, and my parents were expecting me to go to law school. I got off the plane. The first thing I told them was, I am going to be an architect. You can just imagine, they didn't talk to me for probably 3 to 4 months. It was a long story. Eventually they accepted the fact, and I started doing really, really well in school. And there's some amazing things. There's this one book that basically contains, I'll see if I can find it really quick. I know we have very, very little time. It's a book about the
we got to fast forward. We got to fast forward. We got through the childhood. Amazing. So tell me, so obviously there's a deep passion, right?
Deep
Deep
passion.
passion for architecture, deep passion for design. And what I like about the work that you do, from what I've seen in my perspective, is it's not just about function. It really is about taking this life passion, which is so deep, and bringing it into almost an experience in a building, whether that be residential, whether it be office. So how do you create that? How do you take what's inside you and this deep passion and make that into something real that people experience in space as a form of 3D space?
Right, Carly. And so I call this the narrative, and it's a not an uncommon way of talking about architecture, but for me, is a very important thing. For me, I've come to define architecture as the emotional relationship to space, and emotional not as in I cry or I laugh, but in terms of how I am moved, energetically moved, so that emotion. And so once that's the kind of founding direction, the idea is to find those opportunities that will somewhat create a story of emotional responses. And so what that means is many, many different things. But the first thing is doing the making of architecture, which for me starts always with drawings. There's got to be the same kind of empathy and connection. In other words, if I don't feel a connection with the drawing, if I don't feel a connection with the making of it, I know that that connection won't expand into the build project eventually. It's an idea of sort of transformation of energy. So just like a chef, that makes something taste amazing, and we all wonder what, the same ingredients. It's kind of the same thing, because it's that passion and love that's infused, of course, also with knowledge, experience, and a bunch of other layers that need to go into it. Functionality is extremely important, Carly. So it to a certain extent is not that it's secondary. It almost comes with it. As I say, well, let me build a car that doesn't move. It has to move, obviously, it has to function, it has to protect from weather and all these important things. But if there isn't that emotional connection to space, which transforms to a series of responses, there isn't really much there. So the method that I use is a combination of things, but it has a lot to do with intuition, because I believe that we're built as human beings to know certain things before we actually know them. And the idea is that intuition is a shortcut to the truth. Now, that truth also is supported by a lot of knowledge, experience, and build clients that we've worked with, people I work with, et cetera, and a ton of drawings. In the last maybe 6 months, I think I've created close to 600 drawings. And some of them are on social media, a lot of on Instagram, et cetera, and I show the process of making them. But the point is, the sort of repetition and constant looking allows for that intuition to become more of a almost like a unconscious competence of how to do things. Does it make sense?
I think so. Yeah, it sounds like it's a process, obviously, and one where you have to be very aligned with your client, because I could imagine if the shared vision isn't there, the process would be very difficult to get through. So how do clients find you, or how do you find them? Because it seems like a very unique sort of fit or need to kind of approach it more emotionally.
Yes. So yes and no, Carly. I'll give you an answer. So the ideal scenario is exactly what you said. There is an understanding and a reading of the work of, mostly is the work already done, which a lot of people find us online. They see the website, they see, there's several websites and networks where our work can be found, as well as social media. So a lot of people will see that and they will feel some kind of special connection. And obviously they'll reach out and say, well, we love your work. We know we have this in this project. You think you'll be interested. And so that's an ideal scenario. There's another scenario where there's an introduction that could come from either a recommendation, another client, or somebody who has come across our website, but they're not 100% sure what they're looking for. And that is there's still the possibility of creating that connection that I mentioned, because I believe there's two things that we can use to create the narrative. One will be the context, which is there's a certain what's called genius loci in architecture, which is the context, the site itself as a certain way of speaking, a certain kind of ability to tell a story already. Their components are already there, whether it's the views, the light, the angles, or a particular tree or something there. So using that is almost like using something that they're familiar with. It's not coming in with a foreign idea and just imposing on the side. It's taking advantage of that. And the second thing is the ability to take what I call a analogical method, which is instead of using a 1, 2, 3 logical method, we use a method of associations. So if a client comes in with certain ideas and certain passions and certain components, we figure out what's the connection with the site into some of the things that we believe in and create almost a narrative that is more idiosyncratic than logical and rational and kind of progressive. So there's a beauty in the combination of things that are seemingly different. And therefore, I say that it's mostly a in-tuneness with the person, with the client, rather than necessarily them coming in and say, we love what you do, please do it again. Because sometimes it's the opposites happen as well. Some people come in and say, oh, we love exactly, do exactly this, do exactly that. And then they sort of expect us to fit into a mold. And that doesn't work either, because I think every project is completely different and every project is so contextual, both to the clients as well as to the site.
Do you have a favorite? Seems like you are very engaged on probably everything that you do, which I love, which probably is what drives these amazing results as the end product. Do you have a favorite or a top 2 or 3 that you've done that you want to share?
No, absolutely. I mean, there's many projects. I'll answer. Somebody asked me this question yesterday, Instagram, I think it was. And somebody said, what's your favorite project? The answer I gave, which I'll give to you, but then I'll give you also some projects, is that I really love the process. To me, at some level, each project is a component or a fragment of like a bigger project, which is sort of a comprehensive idea about space and architecture, rather than saying, because one project at some point represents the apex of the thinking process, but then very, very shortly after, the next project kind of comes in with new ideas. And so you kind of have to look at them in time, but also as fragments. So you have a project like the Aviator's Villa, and the Aviator's Villa was sort of a conceptual idea that one day I was working in my office. It was a Sunday, and I said, let me see what I can do in 3 hours with no client if I just were to design anything I wanted. And so I created this quick sketch. And then 4 years later, and then it's set in the office like that. 4 years later, we started to redraw some of the project that we had done in the past. And in collaboration with some really other amazing individuals, we came up with this sort of highly realistic version of some of these projects. And so the Aviator's Villa came back to life. And once I saw in that version, I felt like, wow, this is mind blowing. In fact, I believe it's NBC called me maybe like 4 or 5 years ago and said, can we do a video film of you walking through the Aviator's Villa? And I had to tell them that it wasn't built. And they were like, we can't believe that. How is it possible? I said, no, unfortunately, it's not built. So I'm waiting for somebody to actually come out and say, let's build the Aviator's Villa. And that would be amazing. But a lot of other projects like the Sydney Towers that we did, and it's called the Parramatta, and it's 2 twin towers, office buildings. It's an incredible project because the idea is to have almost like a vertical public space. And so there's trees and all this, but the idea is not so much the green parts of it, it's that it's a vertical public space. And so then you have the horizontal office occupation and the sort of vertical existence of regular people walking up the building. And then they happen to meet just like they would back in the days in the medieval town, where you come out onto the street from your shop and you meet people passing by. And so these ideas are really, really intense and interesting. And I do know that eventually they will get built when we find the right client and opportunities. But as you can see, they go back to this narrative and emotional response to the building, which I think it shows in the projects.
I love it. It definitely does from what I've seen. Really, really unique. It's clear you put your heart into it, and it's not standard, which is great. How do you think our view of space has changed in the last 7 months? And I am sure you would argue that this transformation and connection to the way we experience life and space is long before COVID. But obviously the last 7 months have been an incubator of change. What do you think has been accelerated, or what's different than the mindset people had back in March, February?
Well, I think, I mean, on the kind of functionality side of things, of course, things are different. But I think the biggest change, and I did talk to you earlier about this, is a psychological change. In other words, as human beings, there's a certain criteria by which we don't really evolve. Like our sense of space and time, I believe, will always be the same at a essential level, right? So the fact that we maneuver ourselves based on gravity and certain speed, we might get faster or not, but ultimately the human being, it's likely going to be the same. And the sense of time is going to be the same. So at a core level, there's no difference. But psychologically, there is a big difference, which is, number one, what I call is there is a new form to the informal. In other words, we're no longer bound to the limitations we had before of certain kind of appearance before the content. Now, content has become primary, right? So in terms of how space is represented, like I said, essentially will be the same space, with doors and floors and windows. So none of that is going to change. But we're going to have to basically bring in a new way of experiencing each other, which is we're more familiar with the informal. We're more familiar with the unfinished. We're more familiar with the work in progress, seeing Will Smith in his house or kitchen and some other celebrity, in their bathroom or whatever they're doing, or dancing, or, these are things that of course didn't exist even up to maybe a couple years ago. Of course there's been some of it, but the idea is now we're able to be more connected at a basic level. And so now there's a form to that. And I think in terms of architecture, we will start to see architecture, which for me, I think function will be dead. In other words, there will be functionality, right? So there's a kitchen, there's a bathroom, there's an office space, people do what they got to do, but they could be using that same space for so many more things. Like now, everybody uses their homes for their office, or they use, their garage for their workout space. In other words, the space itself is that, but the function, it's completely eliminated, other than the basic stuff, clearly. And I think the idea of individual space becomes now much more interesting. Is what do you need in your own personal space? Because part of it will be your entire life. And so psychologically, that will have an effect on how we design spaces moving forward. In terms of the actuality, it will be the same, if it makes sense.
I think it's fascinating, actually. Do you do currently, and I know you've done the wide range of work, but currently, do you have any commercial projects in the works, or have you done any recently? And even just on a theoretical level, how do you think commercial shopping, retail, how will commercial space be redesigned?
To me, the idea is the world is going to go back exactly to what it was before, as far as
Really?
the maneuvers of, people meeting, stadiums, watching soccer, whatever, football, basketball, all of that's going to be the same. Same thing for shopping. I mean, shopping is, even already before this, it wasn't so much about going to find what you want. It was more about the experience and maybe the restaurants and the cafes, and whether it's in the city or a shopping mall. It was all about the socializing, the interacting, the, being with other people. What I'm saying is that I think that's going to stay, and actually is going to boom even more than before. But it will boom in a different way, because the idea is going to be of incredibly hybrid programs, meaning it's going to be, I'm going to stretch just to be completely exaggerating here, but you could have a church and you could have a supermarket kind of being the same thing, meaning there will be programs that seem to be completely antithetical, separate, remote. They will start to be merged and combined, because there will be more opportunities to do more things in different ways. And so I think that's really what the future is going to be about, which to me is going to be incredibly exciting. Pair that with this new ability to be more content driven and less form driven. All of a sudden, you're going to have incredible experiences, because people are going to be a lot freer to experience space, even in a social setting, and whether it's the TikTok dance or some other craziness, but it's going to be an opportunity to do that more live and together, and create, stuff that gets to be posted on social media. So it's going to be a combination, almost like a interlocking of these two completely different dimensions. The purely virtual, like this one that we're having now, and the total kind of real. And because, like, you and I technically physically we haven't met, but we feel like, okay, well, we've known each other for a long time. That's the same exact idea. When people come together, there'll be more familiarity after the shock and the barriers of the mask and all this, which of course will be gone, obviously. But once that's gone, that's what's going to be left. This incredible range of hybrid spaces. So there won't be the restaurant, the stadium, the this and that. It will be very, 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 very mixed.
So how do you create that fluidity in, let's say, a strip mall or a shopping mall? Is it less defined stores and more open space, pop-up stores? I mean, how do you see that actually practically playing out?
So the way in which this is going to work, in my opinion, is going to be like I said, a mix of content. So if you take a really high content, let's say the Guggenheim Museum, right, which is selected, curated art of a certain level, and all of a sudden you mix it with Times Square, right? So the popularity and the casuality and the mix and the chaos. Imagine putting that into one box, in one space, some kind of building. All of a sudden you created that kind of informality of coming through with the high formality of art display and really curated. Why? Because the artists and the curators are going to, and the architects, that's what I would do, are going to start capturing that informality. They're going to start like saying, okay, we can take advantage of it. People walking by will be the art piece, and same thing for churches, same things for supermarkets, same things for everything else. It won't be overnight, of course, but I think that's where we're moving, this kind of multi-dimensional, hybrid, exciting city where, look, otherwise I'm staying home, because
because why, right?
Right. So in order to create that incentive to go out and experience space, and you can see it now, like some of these buildings, of course, they were pre-COVID and all, but they have, I forgot it's called the corner or the angle, the edge. I think it's called the edge in New York. We have this sort of glass floor on the 200th floor, and then people stand there.
Right.
That's the only way that you're going to start bringing people out. And so developers with architects like myself and I believe I'm not the only one thinking this, they'll start to create something where the experience is really amazing beyond function, because it's been demonstrated, you don't need a building to function. But of course, when you bring function and experience into something that's very hybrid and caters to a lot of people, all of a sudden you have something incredibly successful.
It's very interesting that you tie all that together from a more emotional, experiential side, because just from a straight business side, we're seeing so much overlap between healthcare and industrial and retail and multifamily, and everything's sort of interchangeable now, or we're figuring out how to backfill retail tenants with hospital systems and industrial. And I think that's probably, although less interesting, but that's the start of that sort of intermeshing of all these different facets of our lives and how we use space. So I think you're right. It's just a lot more interesting the way you say it.
Absolutely. No, and I want to just add a couple of things, because I think, the idea is this. Once we remove function per se, meaning, like I said, like a car has to drive, it has to go somewhere. But when you look at a luxury car, it goes beyond function. It's no longer about just the functionality. It's the same thing here, where from a single family home to a condominium, which means multiple apartments, to commercial, to cultural. I think the idea is going to be that people are going to want to be elevated emotionally, in some form spiritually, but I don't mean it in terms of religiously. I mean in terms of the experience of life on earth, so that the being together with other people is going to be the reason, the function, as opposed to the doing something, because of course it can be done from a phone. So even a house, to me, the one house, eventually it will be more of a space, where of course you do have the kitchen, the bathroom, and that kind of stuff. But people will start to decide that it's no longer, let me even program some spaces myself, just design some amazing space, and then we'll think about the rest. Of course, I don't think it's going to be tomorrow morning, but over the next maybe 5 to 10 years, and part of my new journey is being this, of kind of bringing myself into the forefront, and really pushing these ideas a little less as a pure collaboration, because that's how the office started, as a collaboration, a little bit more as my kind of direct involvement in the creation of this idea, and then kind of becoming more the forefront and kind of the flagship, if you wish, because I really want to push these ideas forth and work with clients who are willing to experiment at that level.
I love it. I can't wait to see what you design and what's next. Very exciting. So we just have about 5 more minutes-ish. So I want to switch gears for a minute. You have done projects all over the world. Is there a different mentality in America? And that's a broad generalization, obviously. But do you feel that the way we use space and the way we look at how we move through our day-to-day life is dramatically different? Or is it just the human experience and there's some cultural differences, but it's not as significant?
So yeah, so there are many, I think around the world, the places are very different, and the experience and cultural approach to architecture and relationship in space, it's different. But at a basic level, we all operate the same way, meaning we all sleep, for example, which is a mind-blowing thing we do. Like, what? Why do we turn off?
Shut down, right?
8 hours.
That's
and so
amazing.
there's something very special about it, and somewhat architecture is an extension of our body because it covers us, etc. And so this is a conversation for a different time. But yes, I think the experience is very different, but the capturing the human essence is not. And so that's why it's possible for me or other architects to work around the world, because one is context, which I told you earlier, the actual site as a story to tell, and two, the human being relates through space and time in the same way. Emotionally, culturally, of course, that's going to come into play, and there are things, of course, we have to consider. But I would say what's beautiful about working in different places in the world is capturing these differences, just almost like speaking different languages. I mean, the essence is the same, but the subtleties are very different.
Love it. We are almost out of time. Are there any closing thoughts or other things you'd like to share about projects you have going on, what the future holds, anything in closing that you'd like to share?
I mean, unfortunately, there's too much to say. Partly, I would definitely, I mean, very, very in simple terms, I teach at the university as well. And when we run a 6-hour course, and before we started, and it's online, I thought that, I don't know, we're going to be running out of ideas after, 45 minutes. Actually, we don't have enough time in the 6 hours.
Right.
So it's pretty crazy. But the idea is that, the project I'm working on now are about making some kind of difference, more of an experiential, emotional, interesting kind of great quality architecture. And so there of course, there's functionality. We're building, for example, condominium buildings in Jersey City, Long Island City, here in New York, ground up, 5, 6, 7-story buildings. There, you got to put elevators and stairs and doors. I mean, that's there. But it's always about capturing something innovative there and thinking about people will live there, people will see the building. It's a huge conversation, but hopefully we capture some essence of it in our talk.
What is the best way for people to see examples of your work? Instagram? How do people find you?
Definitely Instagram. Look me up on Instagram at Carlo_Enzo. And this is kind of a hub. Of course, this is our website currently is urbanofficearchitecture.com. It will be rebranded and changed shortly, or at some point between this year and early next year. But Instagram is a place where I do get contact with people, and we can take it from there for sure.
Excellent. So if anyone listening wants to learn more, I highly recommend you pop over to Carlo's Instagram page, The pictures and the content are amazing. So definitely check that out. Of course, reach out to either of us if you'd like to learn more and be connected directly. Carlo, thank you so much for sharing your ideas. I wish we had more time. It was great to just kind of scratch the surface on the way you approach architecture. Thank you so much.
Carly, my pleasure. Thank you so very much for having me.
And to everyone listening, that was Redden NYC's virtual event tonight. I am Carly Iacono, First Vice President at Marcus & Millichap. And again, we were pleased to be joined by Carlo Enzo, the founding principal of Urban Office Architecture. Have a great night, and we look forward to seeing